All right, today we are talking about the importance of a business forum in your business. If you want to grow your business, you should be part of a forum. We're going to talk about how you can do that. My guest today is Mo Fathelbab. He's got a long experience helping business owners, entrepreneurs to use forums and to use them to grow their business. We'll get to him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. You know, every week I just feel so privileged. I get to talk to interesting CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs of all kinds of different companies. And we've had on this show, we've had Netflix, Kinko's, Activation Blizzard, Lending Tree, Open Table, Grubhub, Redfin. Check out the archives. You'll be able to go experience some of those different shows. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25, our company where we help B2B businesses get clients referrals and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And you can learn all about it at rise25.com. And I'm excited here today because, first of all, before we get to our guest, I want to give a shout out. And I found a quote on his website, and the quote said, Mo, which is our guest here today, has been a masterful resource in creating meaningful relationships amongst our CEOs for almost 2 decades. We're grateful for his contributions. That came from Sean McGinnis, who's one of my favorite past guests on this show. He's now very involved in Tiger 21, and he has helped so many different organizations from EO to YPO, and I have massive amount of respect for him. So by extension, I have incredible amount of respect for today's guest, Mo, who's the founder and president of International Facilitators Organization. He's also a keynote and TEDx speaker, has served as moderator of the SHRM Exec Network Insights Forum. He's written a number of best-selling books, and he also, importantly, served as executive director of EO Entrepreneurs Organization during its founding years, very early years when it had about 100 members, helped it grow to a couple thousand members, so from 91 to 97. And he is based in Alexandria, Virginia, which is where he comes from here today. And Mo, it's such a pleasure to have you here today. And I always love to know a little bit about my guests, about what they were like as a kid. And first of all, you grew up in Egypt and you moved over to Alexandria at the age of 11. And you got started with kind of like an Amway product called Shackley, I believe it was, selling different products door to door back in the day before we had the internet and you could order stuff from Amazon with a click of a button. But tell me a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, thank you, John. Great to be on your show. Thank you for the warm welcome and the lovely introduction. It's funny, when I moved, we used to spend our summers in Alexandria, Egypt. And now I live in Alexandria, Virginia, purely coincidental. But, I got here just with my mother. My parents were divorced when I was 3 years old. She got a job at the World Bank, and that's what brought us to the Washington, D.C. area. And pretty quickly, my mom, you could imagine, is a very independent and courageous and brave woman who has broken many a mold. And so to that extent, I also had entrepreneurship in my family. And my mom and her brothers ended up starting the first credit card in Egypt. And, her uncle had a big oil services company. So entrepreneurship was not an unfamiliar concept for me at a very young age. And so as I was 12, 13, I started to think about how to earn a living, how to make money, how to, start to play with this world of business.
And that's pretty courageous because you're also in a new country. I don't know what your mastery of English was at that age. If you grew up speaking a lot of English, but to go door to door in your new country, did that feel foreign to you, or did it kind of come naturally?
Well, first of all, English was part of my life from kindergarten. I went to a private all-boys school, and it was actually run by a bunch of nuns, and it was a Christian school, and they spanked us if we were late. They spanked us if we got a bad grade, if we spoke out of turn. But we also had French starting 4th grade. We had Arabic. We had religion. And, when I left in 6th grade, I actually failed 2 subjects, Arabic and religion. English, on the other hand, was a piece of cake. So when I got to the US, English was not a problem. But yeah, I think reflecting on it, it was pretty courageous to do that. And I certainly I'm reflecting on that in a bit of amazement because I was also shy at the time.
Mm.
But I remembered something, that my grandfather always said to me, and it was a message about courage and bravery. And what he would say is, if you ever find yourself in the jungle and you come across a lion, reach in its throat and rip its guts out.
Mm.
And for me, I think that has just given me this inspiration to step into the fire and not be afraid. And perhaps that was part of it.
I moved around, I think a fair amount when I was a kid, never internationally, but it was always from coast to coast. So I was born in DC, went to Southern California, then went to Massachusetts, back to Southern California. So it was like these massive moves, 3,000 miles away from family and friends. And I feel like it really shaped who I am today. Do you think that pivotal move at age 11, which is such a foundational time of life, from the country you'd grown up in to Washington, D.C., do you think it affects you to this day? And how do you think it's impacted your life?
Oh gosh, so many ways. First of all, shout out to this amazing country we live in. It's been a blessing. It's been life changing. I don't know that I would have had as many opportunities, and I certainly don't know that I would have been doing this work, which I love so much. I think of my life, and I think there's been a bunch of forks, some of which I had no control over, but they very much impacted where I am today and what I do today. And that move absolutely is one of the most pivotal things that have happened to change my life for the better.
Yeah. And speaking of pivotal things, so after college, you end up getting a job as associate director of this nascent organization that only had about 100 members at the time. We're talking, this is 1990, Entrepreneurs Organization. What did you know about it at the time when you're hired in this role?
Well, I think the backstory is important here. So I took a class in entrepreneurship at the University of Maryland, and it was the only class of entrepreneurship they offered at the time. Today, they have a whole Dingman Center for Entrepreneurship, right? But Vern Harnish, who was the founder of EO, was my teacher. And I remember literally walking to the classroom, and he shows up to the door, shakes my hand, and says, "Hi, I'm Vern Harnish. I'll be your professor for the semester."
Mm.
And no other teacher had ever done that. And Vern continued to exceed my expectations every single time. He brought in various entrepreneurs to come talk to us, and many of them were members of EO. And, to hear their stories was inspiring. And to tell you, of course, I was already aware of the entrepreneurial ventures in my own family. And that's probably what drew me to taking that course. And so after the class was over and I graduated at the same time, I went to Vern's office just to say, "Vern, I want to thank you. You're the best teacher I've ever had."
Hmm.
And at that moment, he says, "Do you know anybody who'd like to be my associate director?"
Hmm.
And I said, "I think I do." And so that was how I got started down that journey. And it wasn't anything impressive or exciting at the time. I mean, Vern told lots of stories of trips to Japan and China and meetings with the founding board members who were incredibly impressive people. Neil Balter of California Closet Company. They had Steve Jobs as one of their top entrepreneurs of the year in a related organization. And so the people that Vern was talking about, Michael Dell was on the founding, was a member for a while, and it was impressive. But when I started work day one, January 2nd, 1990, we had less than $20,000 in the bank, and we were just getting going. And the office was in the worst drug trafficking neighborhood in the country, according to Geraldo Rivera. But I was all excited about the possibilities, and I saw nothing but a bright opportunity with such an amazing organization and such an amazing teacher.
Now, today, the forum experience is a pivotal part of this organization. I can say that having participated in forums, and I'm going to be seeding a new forum, which I'm excited about. But for those who don't know what that is, talk a little bit about what the forum experience is. And I'd love to know a little bit more about why you became so passionate about it. And then we'll dive into the process of kind of rolling it out across the organization. But first, like for those who aren't familiar with what a forum experience is, what is it at its best?
At its best, it is a group of 7 or 8 people who are peers, so they respect one another, who have no conflicts of interest, so they could be 100% free to be open and honest, who agree to a confidentiality protocol and to a language protocol where they don't judge or give advice. And that enables vulnerability, which enables meaningful connections, which allows people to really learn, grow, benefit from each other's wisdom. And it's a powerful thing. I'm in my group since 1991.
Wow. And so originally that, as I understand it, was not necessarily a critical component of being a part of EO, and you were involved in actually helping to roll it out. So talk to me a little bit about that initiative.
Yeah. So when I started working at EO, we had been working on an alliance with YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And as we started to formulate that alliance, we learned that they had 10,000 members, I think, or maybe 7,000 members at the time.
Yeah,
Around
a lot
the
older
world.
organization. I believe that started in the 50s, late 50s.
Yeah, it started in the 50s. And they had this thing called Forum, which they said was their number one member benefit. So here's this group of CEOs whose average business is $40 million, who at the time had 8,000 members around the world. And their number one member benefit is this thing they called Forum. So we're like, what is that? We want some of that magic.
Mm-hmm.
So finally, in June of 91, they said, okay, we are going to allow a group of 20 of you to attend one of our moderator trainings. And so a bunch of us went up to this training in Toronto. From Mexico, US, Canada, we had 20 people who were really empowered with going to this 2-day training, learning this program, and going back to their chapters and starting peer groups or forums in their chapters. I fell in love with it, which I'll talk about in a second, but I saw quickly that it was a high expectation to expect these people, based on 2 days of training, to go back and effectively launch groups doing this the right way, because it was a bit complicated. So I went to the board and I said, look, if we really want to get this on the map, I think we need to have somebody who's really well-trained, who understands it very well, and who is going to go start forum groups together so that they can have this deep bonding experience with the people they're actually going to be in forum with. And so they're following the right format. We want to make sure that, they're not losing sight of the process, which is so important for enabling this meaningful dialogue. So the board said yes, and I went on and started traveling the world. I probably did this in 30 countries. I mean, I've done this kind of work in way over 30 countries at this point, but by then, I probably did it in 30 countries just to get these programs going for EO around the world. And then, of course, I couldn't do all the trainings at some point. And so we created a train-the-trainer program. And, the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah. And briefly, maybe we can talk about some of the best practices and that you've seen across different forums. You mentioned that you said you've been in the same one since 1991. What are some of those critical ingredients that you see that leads forums to be successful? And flip side of that coin, what will torpedo a forum?
Other than the ones I've already discussed, commitment is absolutely essential. So you could imagine a group of entrepreneurs, everybody's busy, especially in this day and age. We have a million things tugging at our calendar. And without commitment, it doesn't work. So in fact, what we do in my group is we schedule months in advance. We schedule 6 to 12 months in advance with the idea that we're going to plan our lives around our forum meetings and not vice versa, because otherwise we have a million reasons not to make it.
Sure.
You can't be late. If you're late, you buy dinner. Sometimes that's our policy. Every group's different. And that dinner could be $1,000. So, for some people, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because, I've seen people that run $50 million businesses and they'll run across the parking lot to make sure they're not late so they don't have to buy the $1,000 dinner. Maybe there's a little bit of pride involved in it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, well, plus maybe they just don't want to be late, so they could, not let their peers down.
Right.
But listen, I know groups that say you have to do a push-up for every minute because that's more equal than money, or do a half day in the soup kitchen if you're late. But listen, it's not about being punitive, right? It's just about, are we committed and do we show commitment to one another, and are we present for one another?
Right.
Because you're not there to learn from a speaker. You're there to actually really help your fellow forum members.
Right. And did you find, you said you went to 30 different countries. Did you find that this was something that transcended, cultures and transcended local geographies? And it's amazing to me that you have this format that it can work in so many different places and so many different backgrounds, so many different countries.
We're all human beings. And what that means is we have emotions, whether we're willing to own them or not, whether we're willing to share them or not. We all have emotions. So in that regard, yes, I do find it's worked in, 95% of the places that I've been. There are some places where it works, but for me, it just feels like it's not as meaningful and not as satisfying. But maybe I just have higher expectations. But it does work. It certainly works in every culture.
So EO is now, I don't know, 33 years old or something like that. It's got, I believe at last count, about 18,000 members. You were there when it had 100. As we said, got it to a couple thousand. Other than Forum, there's obviously a lot of different elements to the organization. But what else do you think was the reason that it sustains, that it continues to grow, this 33 years later, looking back at that time that you were there, is there something that you can point to, the reason why it continued to grow and why it continues to serve a meaningful purpose for so many people?
One phrase that I heard quite a lot is it's lonely at the top. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a CEO, who do you talk to? Your friends who you love dearly, with whom you went to high school or college, who don't have their own businesses, may not relate to your struggles. They may say, oh, well, you've got whatever, this car or that house or this much money. Do you really have a struggle? Your family might be sick of hearing about those struggles. And they want you to focus and be present for them. And so it ends up being lonely at the top. And so to that end, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a CEO, and you don't have a group to belong to that can help you with navigating life's issues, then you're not as armed as someone else. But I think the other thing is, Forum really makes it sticky. So people might join because they want to grow their business, but then they come find real meaningful relationships that are lifelong relationships. I mean, John, I'll tell you, one of my just maybe because people don't grasp what it means to be vulnerable and really deep, but I'll just tell you a little story. My group, we're so close. We don't miss anybody's wedding, bar mitzvah, funeral for a family member, anything like that. And one of our members lost his mother, and the funeral was in New York. I flew up, and he was getting out of his limo at the same time I was getting out of my Uber. And he saw me, he came over, he hugged me, and he started to cry. And he said, this is the first moment I felt safe to cry. He'd been with his family for a couple of days. But that's how special a connection we build in these groups. And it's so inspiring.
Yeah, it's so nice to be there and to support him in that way, in that moment. I want to ask you about, you end up moving on from EO and you started an organization called Forum Resources Network. What was the concept behind that? What was the business model? Did you figure that this concept you could take it and apply it into other spheres or other industries?
Exactly. So when I left really for two reasons. And, I struggled with that decision for a couple of years, I have to tell you, because it was my blood, it was my life, it was my entire professional career, really, since graduating college. And I always thought I'm going to leave when two things happen. One, I'm not happy for some reason, intersecting with I have something that I feel very excited about. I'm not going to leave just for one of those two reasons. I needed both to happen. And that moment came. And what I believed then, that I still believe in my soul to this day, is that every human being would be better off if they had a forum. So Forum Resources Network was founded to provide forums to other audiences outside of, or I shouldn't say outside, in addition to the EO and no IPO communities that do this work. And so through that organization, we've had the fortune to do forums for Google, for underrepresented minorities at Google. And then a subsequent organization that I co-founded, Alumni Forum Services. We've done peer groups for HBS alumni, Harvard Business School alumni. We've done peer groups for former athletes. We have a client called The Post, started by a former NFL quarterback, and they provide forums for former athletes. I've done work with groups of dentists. I could go on, but the point is, it's not just for CEOs or entrepreneurs anymore. If you are interested in growing and improving and having a powerful group of people who has your back, who has no personal interest that might be in contrast or in conflict with what you want, I cannot think of something more incredibly profound to help you grow and be the best you could be.
Now, of course, you started this organization in 97. That was kind of the end of the dot-com era, 98, 99, 2000, and then there's 9/11. So take me back to kind of that time period. What are your memories of this time? Were there struggles in the early days to get clients and to figure out product market fit? Or do you feel like you were able to, because of your experience previously with EO, that you were able to get more of a fit and it took off from the beginning?
I made a mistake. I maybe my ego was in the way, but when I quit EO, I did not negotiate anything to continue doing the part of the job that I love doing with EO. And I probably could have done that. And so as a consequence, in fact, it took me a long time to get on my feet. And I was living in my mother's basement for 18 months and had $30,000 in credit card debt. And you know what? I wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah.
9/11, I mean, 01, we also had a dip. And 9/11, we had a dip. And you know what? I certainly, business went down 50% at one point. I remember sitting on a park bench with my girlfriend at the time, who's my life partner for the last 25 years or so, and saying, listen, you need to know, money's a bit tight right now. Business is down 50%. Look, I think that stuff makes you stronger. I think it's all about attitude. It's all about adjusting, looking for the opportunities. I don't wish to change anything that happened. It was maybe tough at the time, but I think it makes you stronger.
Yeah. And now come to present day, you founded a new organization called the International Facilitators Organization. What inspired that?
Back to my mission from 1997, I think every human being deserves to be in a peer group. So this organization is about creating an ecosystem, a community of facilitators who do this work, because I really can't do that much more of it. I'm pretty maxed out in terms of my schedule, and it's a blessing. I'm grateful for it. So this organization is about creating certified facilitators to do this work so we could spread this throughout and hopefully get to our goal of 1 billion people in peer groups by 2053. And I know that's a BHAG in the Jim Collins parlance, big, hairy, audacious goal.
Hmm.
But again, hanging around all these entrepreneurs and CEOs for all these years, if that doesn't inspire you to have a BHAG and go for something out there, I don't know what will.
Yeah. I was a facilitator for my forum, and I've noticed just being around the organization for a number of years that language has changed a little bit, and trainings have changed a little bit. It doesn't change dramatically, but if you look back on the last 30 years, how are forums run today compared to 30 years ago? What ways have they changed, if at all?
I mean, a couple of things. One of them, notably, before the engagement with Google, I remember at the beginning in my discussions with them, they said, "Hey, but we want to do this virtually." This is just before the pandemic, John. And I say to them, "Virtually? I've
No,
never done anything
absolutely
virtually.
not.
What are you
Right.
And my client there, in
You weren't
fact,
the
had
only one.
been
In fairness, there's lots of people that said couldn't be
right.
done,
Thank you. You're
right?
with me.
So,
You're feeling this. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
And so my client at the time was part of the HBS alumni program that we had put together, and he was very well versed in this process and understood that there's a risk in doing it virtually, which had never been done. But what was really profound, two things. One, the timing. Imagine the pandemic happens, and if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, people are locked away, they're
Yeah,
scared,
yeah,
and they're not even leaving their house in many cases. So that combined with the Black Lives Matter movement made these groups incredibly vulnerable immediately.
mm,
And they bonded like I never imagined possible, just on a screen like we are doing right now. And then what happened, which was also an unexpected surprise, is we were able to have meetings with somebody in Rio and somebody in Lagos, Nigeria, and somebody in Dublin, and somebody in San Francisco, and somebody in New York. And before you know it, you were making connections globally in a way that hadn't really been done before. So it was quite amazing and quite profound. And so that was one thing that's changed from the beginning is this Zoom
yeah,
era and the ability to do this where it's not always in person. I think another thing is we've just gotten more sophisticated at teaching and convincing people of the various tools. So one example that immediately comes to mind is, the word vulnerability. I don't think we used in 1991. It's
mm,
become popularized, and thank you, Brené Brown. I give her a shout out every time I can. That TEDx talk of hers has just taken off, and I'm glad for it. But I think people today are more predisposed to understanding the value of vulnerability. And I think that's helping connect with both the ability to get people to sign up for these groups and for people to make these groups more meaningful. Because just having a conversation about why be vulnerable gives people insight as to, oh my God, I need to do this. So, when you ask that question, somebody says, well, that's how you make connections. Well, yeah. How do you have real relationships if people aren't vulnerable? Somebody says it's a relief. And, we've read the book, The Body Keeps Score. Some of us have read it. And in that book, they talk about how anxiety and emotional well-being eventually affects your physical well-being and manifests into disease. And so this relief of getting something off your chest isn't just literally getting it off your chest, but it's actually getting it off your chest in terms of the impact that it could have on your health. And then they talk about growth. If I'm vulnerable, I grow because I get to address it and I get to learn from my peers. And I could go on,
yeah.
but that's I would say a new way of thinking about this work and the value of this work that's also been quite profound. We also did some work with David Bradford from the Graduate School of Business at Stanford, and for YPO, not for EO, there's a refinement of the process by which we help a member, where we dig in much more deeply into the emotional space, because often we make decisions with our heads, and in his words, David Bradford, we wake up with an emotional hangover. And so when something is really meaningful, it's not just a rational decision. There's a huge emotional component to that decision. And in this process, we honor it more to help people really better understand what's driving their decision making.
Yeah. It's interesting that you've zeroed in with your new organization on the role of the facilitator, which can be different in different contexts. So there's organizations like Vistage, which have, like a paid facilitator. There's organizations like YPO and EO, which have kind of a rotation of facilitator. But what's your pitch? If I'm thinking about being a facilitator, what are the benefits to me of being a facilitator? I'm just interested to hear from your perspective.
I mean, look, I'll say this tongue in cheek, but to be in this space is to really have more support and therapy than any human being possibly can.
Mhm.
I say that jokingly, but half jokingly, because I've heard that said before from my peers. Um, but it is honestly the most gratifying work I could imagine because I really believe we help people in profound ways that is life changing. And there's not a day that I go to work where I don't find myself feeling elevated at the end of the day and knowing that, you know what, I've made a difference for these people. And I hear it from our clients. I like to be careful with how I say those things because it may not sound humble, and I don't like that. But I truly hear from our clients how often has made a difference for them.
For them, just like, because like one of the benefits I like to think about is it allows you to practice leadership in a safe space. It allows you to practice. It also allows you to, frankly, observe other leaders in a safe space and see how they would lead and hear their perspective. So maybe if you could reflect a little bit more on that kind of role of being a facilitator.
Well, you're more exposed. So imagine the benefit of being in one forum group. Well, now imagine having the ability to see so many forum groups. And so there's benefit of meaningful relationships all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's benefit of really seeing your work have an impact. There's benefit of feeling a sense of fulfillment for having done something good. I don't do this just for money. Like I've always said, if I won the lottery, I would do this for free. And in fact, not that I have won the lottery, but I'm far enough in my career that I do a lot of this for free. Not a lot, as in more than say 10% of our actual engagements, but just any opportunity where I think there's a worthy cause, I absolutely will do it for free. I would tell you one extension of it, which has come up during the last few months, has to do with the Middle East conflict. And so we've had a few clients call and say, listen, we have members or employees that are at each other's throats because they've gotten into arguments about what's right and what's wrong about this Middle East situation. And can you facilitate a conversation? And so we've held these conversations in DC and London virtually. The first call I got was actually a group from Israel. And just to remind you, I was born in Egypt, but it was a group from Israel. And really, it's about providing space for empathy, for listening, for understanding, for building bridges and having people see each other as human beings. The story I shared earlier about my forum mate whose mother's funeral I went to in New York, he was Jewish. He is Jewish. And, I think it just speaks to the profoundness of the connection that happens when you see somebody as a human being.
Yeah.
All these other things melt away. It doesn't matter if they're Christian, Muslim, or Jewish, or Chinese, or Indonesian, or whatever. We're all people. And I think that often is what gets lost in this world as we watch the news is we've forgotten to see each other's humanity.
You mentioned earlier the impact on the body. I know fitness is really important for you. Talk a little bit about the role that has played for you in the work that you do and as an entrepreneur.
I started out just maybe 3 years after college. I mean, I always exercised all through my life, but after college, I forgot because I was working on my career and we were traveling and doing all these amazing conferences and events. But what really cemented it for me, I think about, 10 years ago, I took a course on positive psychology. And I learned that there's a very direct correlation between exercise and mental health. And I realized that I was working out episodically. I would train 6 months for a triathlon, and then I wouldn't work out for 6 months because it was my busy season.
Mm.
And I realized that is not good.
Mm.
So now I'm committed. I work out, 7 days a week, maybe minimum 3 or 4 if I absolutely can't do more. But generally speaking, I'm 7 days a week.
Mm.
And part of that has been, first the running and then the triathlons. And now I really love stand-up paddleboarding and golf and hot yoga.
Yeah,
And
and
it
you
has,
competed. This is interesting. He competed in hot yoga nationally, which I didn't even know that was a thing.
it's one of those things that everybody says, John, so you're not alone. But
Okay.
here's what happened. I started doing hot yoga after injuring myself in the triathlons, and it was really therapeutic. But I think my competitive nature got the attention of a couple of my teachers, and on 2 occasions they said, "I'll coach you if you want to compete." So I said, "Well, why not? Let me take a crack at it." And I I started applying myself, and I found some success in it, winning the Mideast Regional championship for men over 50, and then competing in the nationals. But basically, you have a bunch of postures to choose from with different levels of difficulty, and you're graded by a panel of judges on how well you execute them. And based on that, they score you.
And are the judges in like this like grandstand of audience all in the hot environment? Like, well, I'm
Oh, got it.
I'm
So,
picturing
yeah.
like, 300 people like sweating, like watching you
No,
compete.
no, 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 no. In the competition, the room is not hot. So the
Okay.
daily practice, the room's
Oh,
105
got it.
degrees.
Okay. Okay.
And I sweat 10 pounds in the daily practice. It's so hot and humid. And I say 10 pounds, not exaggerating. It's not always 10. It depends on how difficult the teacher is and how hot the room is. It's not always perfectly consistent, but sometimes it's 10 pounds.
Wow.
And I weigh
Wow. Who
155,
needs
so that's a lot.
who needs Ozempic? Jeez, hot yoga is
You
what we
don't
all
need
need.
Ozempic.
Well, this has been
And I want
this
to
is
say this though, one thing that about that sport, which is unfortunate, is the guy who started it was caught up in a bunch of bad stuff. We'll leave it at that. And a lot of the studios today don't use his name anymore, and they just call it the 26+2. But I want to be clear that I've not supported that guy with a single penny in my life. I've only supported the studio owners, and just be sure that some people have an issue with it, which I do as well.
Thank you. Well, I want to wrap up, and I usually remember to warn my guests of this question beforehand, and I have to admit that I didn't warn you beforehand. So you'll be forgiven if you want to take a pass on it, or if you need a little time to think about it. But I'm a big fan of gratitude, and I love expressing gratitude to those who've helped us along the way in our journey, especially peers and contemporaries. So oftentimes when I'm interviewing someone who's in a forum, they mention forum mates. I love to hear stories about those sorts of ways in which they've helped you, whether it's coming over to your house when you needed help to put the pieces back together with the business or whatever. But is there anyone in particular that you would want to shout out and thank for helping you in your journey?
I usually thank Vern Harnish because I think he changed my life. If he hadn't hired me as associate director, the rest of my life would look very different right now. But the way you asked the question, I have to honor someone else. And it's because he did something really unexpected. And it's really a testament to Forum yet again. But I can't remember how long ago, let's call it 9 years ago, I had a dip in business and in cash, and I mentioned it to my forum. A couple of weeks later, I go to my mailbox and there's a check for $20,000 from a Tom Sweeney, Tom, shout out, love you, my friend, my brother.
Hmm.
And it said, pay me back when you want.
Hmm.
Now, I didn't actually need the check. I called him, I thanked him, I told him I love him, and I tore it up and put it in the trash. But that just shows you what kind of love we have in our group, and what kind of love you can have in your group.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I probably wouldn't have torn it up. I probably would have put it on the edge of the
Framed
desk.
it maybe.
Just put it over here and be like, okay, I'm going to try not use this, but just in case, that would have been me. But hey, Mo, this has been great. Where can people go to learn more about you and International Facilitators Organization and connect with you?
Yeah, thank you. So Mo Fathelbab on LinkedIn, International Facilitators Organization.com is the website. And I would be honored to help anybody who's interested in pursuing anything in the line of forum or being a facilitator or any organization that could benefit from having these groups.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mo.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.